Greetings and welcome to the channel. This is Mikhailov from Team Retroid, where we like retro games and the devices that bring them to us. Today we're bringing you an interesting unit. It's an incremental upgrade to one of my favorite handhelds of 2025. This is the Retroid Pocket G2. It has the same look, feel, and many of the same hardware features of the Retroid Pocket 5, but it's rocking a much more powerful chip. It's a curious little device, and in this video, we're going to see if it's worth your hard-earned dollar bucks. So let's dive in and get to work. At time of recording, you can order the Retroid Pocket G2 direct from Retroid's website for about $219 before shipping. The model featured in this video was sent to me by Retroid for the purposes of this review. As is always required, all opinions are my own, I'm not getting paid, and they're not seeing this video before it is published. It's time to hop on our mount and ride into Spec Town. The Retroid Pocket G2 is powered by the Snapdragon G2 Gen 2 processor. The GPU is an Adreno A22. The device has 8GB of LPDDR5X RAM and comes with 128GB of storage. You can also expand storage via a micro SD card slot. The screen is a 5.5-inch AMOLED screen with a resolution of 1920 by 1080 and a 60Hz refresh rate. Giving the device life is a 5000 mAh battery. For connectivity, this handheld has Wi-Fi 6 as well as Bluetooth 5.4. The device ships with Android 15. Let's go ahead and unbox the unit. Things should look pretty familiar here. Inside the box, you have the protective foam, a QC tag, and the unit itself. There's also a nice quick start manual and a USB-C charger. Now this device is essentially a plus model of another device that released earlier this year called the Retroid Pocket 5. It has the same form factor, the same AMOLED screen, the same buttons and triggers, the same Hall sensing joysticks, the same ports, and even the same accessories. I mentioned earlier that the Retroid Pocket 5 is one of my favorite devices of 2025. Not so much for the power, but for the comfort and versatility I have when emulating games on this device. I have my Retroid Pocket 5 set up to dual boot to a Linux-based operating system called Rocknix. This allows me to cut out a lot of the fat that comes with setting up an Android device so I can just jump right into my games. It also has Portmaster support, so I loaded a ton of Linux ports of PC games and fan projects like Starship and Shovel Knight Treasure Trove. The original Retroid Pocket 5 to me has always been an amazing Game Boy Advance machine because of the 5.5-inch AMOLED screen. It's not a true 3:2 aspect ratio screen, and you do get black bars on the left and right, but the blacks in the AMOLED screen are so dark that you don't even notice. In fact, the RP5 is how I've played the majority of a ROM hack called Pokemon Unbound. I'm slowly making my way through, and it's a surprisingly good Pokemon ROM hack, considering most of them aren't that great. The Retroid Pocket 5 this past year has been a really decent Switch Lite Plus for me. In fact, if you compare the RP5 and the RPG2 to an actual Switch Lite, I would argue that the Retroid devices are a much nicer package. The Switch Lite isn't as ergonomic, it can't play as many retro games, and it's not as pocketable. If I were to choose between these devices, I would pick one of the Retroid ones over a Switch Lite. I'm able to emulate a fair chunk of D-pad-centric Switch games using the Snapdragon 865 chip that came with the Retroid Pocket 5. And the things that I haven't been able to emulate, I've been able to play through either local streaming or cloud gaming. Things like NVIDIA GeForce Now and Xbox One Game Pass work very well on this device depending on your internet connection. But then Retroid went ahead and released a second screen attachment to help with Nintendo DS and 3DS emulation. It's a little clunky and not the most ideal, but if you already have one of these Retroid devices, you don't have to go out of your way to grab a second handheld if you want to do second screen emulation. Retroid also released a variant called the Retroid Pocket Flip 2, which took everything that was cool about the Retroid Pocket 5 and made it a clamshell. I reviewed this handheld earlier in the year, and a lot of people loved this thing, but I ultimately ended up sticking with the tried and true RP5. I'll leave links in the description to that review because a lot of the opinions I have about the RP5, I also have about the Retroid Pocket G2. So let's bring things back to the Retroid Pocket G2 because this thing is essentially a Retroid Pocket 5 on steroids. If you look at a simple benchmark like the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme Stress Test, the Snapdragon G2 Gen 2 is double the power of the RP5. There are also a bunch of other things that we need to consider with this handheld, including the price. The G2 comes in at about $219 before shipping and also has some of the new colorways that the Retroid Pocket 5 doesn't have. However, the Retroid Pocket 5 is now down to $199 before shipping. And then there's the elephant in the room, the upcoming Retroid Pocket 6. This handheld will be shipping in January of 2026 and will have some marked improvements at this price point. There will be 256 gigabytes of storage versus the 128 gigabytes in the Retroid Pocket 5 and G2 handhelds, and the Retroid Pocket 6 will be powered by the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, the same chip that powers the Odin 2 line of handhelds and the recently released AYN Thor. If we run a 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test on the Thor, we're coming up with an overall score that's higher than the Retroid Pocket G2. And these are the numbers that we can pretty much expect on the upcoming Retroid Pocket 6. However, if we look at the price for the 256GB model of the RP6, we're also looking at an increase in price to $259 before shipping. Plus, I would start to argue that we are hitting a point of diminishing returns on these handhelds. We've been able to emulate higher end systems for a while now, and many people already have their endgame handhelds in hand. The power difference between the G2 Gen 2 and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 really does not seem all that significant enough to warrant waiting if you need a pocketable handheld right now. In fact, when we get into the gameplay testing, the only issue I found was with the physical storage on the device itself. There's only 128 gigabytes of storage, and for emulation, you can rely on putting all of your ROMs on a micro SD card, but now we're starting to get into native PC emulation through GameHub Lite, and you can't use a micro SD card to store those games that might be in your various Steam, Epic, GOG libraries. It has to go to the physical storage of the device itself. So to that end, due to the 128 gigabytes on the Retroid Pocket G2, I was only able to put a few games on the device before I saw that storage start to fill up. That said, each of the lightweight titles that I tested work just fine. I had to potentially tweak a setting here and there, and my good friend Kay from Kay's Retro Gaming just released a video on which settings you need to tweak and when. So if you're interested in utilizing GameHub Lite on this handheld, I actually highly recommend you go check that video out. 3DS emulation is also a beast on this device, and you can upscale to a 3x resolution, which is all you really need. And if you have that second screen meant for the RP5, it will work here as well. If not, there are still some great games for the system that you can play without the second screen. PSP is another system I highly recommend for the Retroid Pocket G2. You can upscale the resolution, maintain the 16:9 aspect ratio that the PSP is known for, and have an amazing experience with even harder to emulate games like Outrun and God of War. As I mentioned before, you can emulate the original Nintendo Switch on this handheld using an emulator such as Citron. Where the Retroid Pocket 5 was able to emulate light Nintendo Switch as well, this device will handle the same games, but handle them better. In fact, the same lightweight games I played on the Retroid Pocket 5 in high performance mode may potentially run well on the G2 if you do regular performance mode, or even in some cases, standard mode, and that will save you on battery life. Cloud gaming will generally just work depending on your internet connection. You might be conflicted doing cloud gaming on this device because of how cramped it can get. I guess it depends on what game you're playing or where you're playing it. I find the best experience using Game Pass or GeForce Now on a device like this is right before bed, because you can lay on your side, play this handheld, and not feel like your arms are just hanging in the air getting tired. Most other situations, I'll probably reach for something with a bigger screen or even an x86 handheld. Android gaming suffers from the same problem as emulating PC games on the device. There just isn't enough storage space available to load up on Android games, and you cannot use the microSD card to expand this storage. Most games on Google Play Pass are generally small in size, so you could probably stick with those, but bigger games like Genshin Impact or Wuthering Waves will definitely bottleneck your internal storage, even though they can run on this device. So with that, let's wrap things up with my final thoughts. I love the Retroid Pocket 5 even to this day, and the Retroid Pocket G2 has improved on the Retroid Pocket 5 in the most important ways while keeping everything about the RP5, including the design, intact. This has the added benefit of all RP5 accessories working on the RPG2, including the grip or the second screen. If you already have a Retroid Pocket 5 and are considering upgrading to the Retroid Pocket G2, you won't need to rebuy cases or grips or screens because everything you already have will just work. In addition to the added power under the hood, the new colorways are really nice and remind me even more of the Switch Lite. To me, this handheld is a Switch Lite that could do so much more than Nintendo's actual handheld because you could play thousands of games from thousands of different systems on an absolutely amazing AMOLED screen, and you don't need to wait until 2026 to do it. You could grab this model and most likely have it within 2 weeks, less if you spring for DHL. No handheld is perfect, however, so let's dive into the negatives. I really wish that Retroid put 250 gigabytes of storage into this handheld. With the increasing amounts of storage requirements for games and the advent of PC gaming on Android, the 128 gigabytes of storage just fills up quick. I only installed 4 or 5 lightweight games, and I definitely felt that storage starting to fill up. Just having a little more wiggle room for GameHub Lite would have been nice. And this actually makes me want to load up Rocknix so I can use Portmaster over there, but unfortunately that is not yet available for the G2, and it doesn't look like that's something that we can see anytime soon due to the unique nature of the G2 processor, which makes me just kind of want to reach for the Retroid Pocket 5 more, or wait till the Retroid Pocket 6, which has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, and may actually be able to get Rocknix compatibility. And speaking of which, there is that problem that the Retroid Pocket G2 is competing with itself, or rather, its upcoming younger brother in the Retroid Pocket 6. Some people might be satisfied enough to grab the G2. Others might want that extra storage and Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip, and are willing to wait an extra 2 months to get it. It's just kind of odd to have this middle ground handheld, even if it is a very capable one. But let me know what you think in the comments below. That'll do it for this video, but if you already missed me, please feel free to like, subscribe, and join me in the Retro Handhelds Discord. Please consider joining these wonderful people who grow and support the channel through Patreon. Thank you so much for watching. Until the next one, bye for now.